Well, hello there, and welcome to my kitchen table. Right, today we are off to Gainesville in Florida, which is the most populated city in the northern central Florida area, with a population of 145,214. It's very precise, isn't it? Yeah, that's from the 2022 census. The city is a home to the University of Florida, which is the fourth largest public university campus by enrolment in the United States. The university is represented by the Florida Gators sports teams in the NCAA competitions, National Collegiate Athletic Association. So, now that you know where we are, if you're ready, take a seat and I'll tell you a story. Daniel Harold Rowling was born on May 26, 1954, and he was known as the Gainesville Ripper. He was an American serial killer who murdered 5 students in Gainesville over 4 days in August in 1990. He later confessed to forcing himself on several of his victims, committing a triple homicide in his home city of Shreveport, Louisiana, and attempting to murder his own father in May 1990. In total, he actually confessed to killing 8 people. What a guy. Daniel, or Danny, Rowling was one of 2 sons born to James Harold Rowling and his wife Claudia. James was a Korean War veteran in the US Navy and a Shreveport police officer, a position that he very much abused, I might add. He often abused his wife and his sons for frivolous things, such as breathing in a way he didn't like. Huh? He also told his son that he was unwanted from birth. Great father, yeah. In one incident, Rowling's mother went to the hospital after claiming her husband had tried to make her cut herself with a razor blade. How do you make someone cut themselves with a razor blade? She made repeated attempts to leave her husband, but always returned shortly after. James once pinned Rowling to the ground and handcuffed him, and he had the police take his son away because he was embarrassed by him. See what I mean about abusing his position? But what about the other officers? They shouldn't have done what he asked them to do. It's just ridiculous. In another story, Rowling had a dog, but James beat the dog so often that it actually died in his son's arms. Now that's sad. That is very sad. As a teenager and a young adult, Rowling was arrested several times for robberies in Georgia and was caught spying on women getting dressed and undressed. As an adult, he had trouble trying to assimilate into society or holding down a job. In August 1990, Rowling murdered 5 students, 1 student from Santa Fe College and 4 from the University of Florida, during a burglary and robbery spree in Gainesville, in Florida. He mutilated his victims' bodies, decapitated 1, and he then posed them, sometimes using mirrors as if they were looking at themselves. In the early morning hours of Friday, August 24th, Rowling broke into the apartment shared by 2 university freshmen, 18-year-old Sonia Larson and 17-year-old Christina Powell. He found Powell asleep on the downstairs couch, and he stood over her briefly, but didn't wake her up, choosing instead to go upstairs to the bedroom, where Larson was also asleep. Rowling murdered Larson, first taping her mouth shut to stifle her screams, and then stabbing her to death with a K-bar knife. She died trying to defend herself. Rowling then went back downstairs and taped Powell's mouth shut. He bound her wrists together behind her back and threatened her with a knife as he cut off her clothes. He then forced himself on her and turned her face down on the ground, where he stabbed her 5 times in the back. Rowling posed the bodies in provocative positions. He even took a shower before he left. A day later, on Saturday, August 25th, Rowling broke into the apartment of an 18-year-old chemistry honours student at nearby Santa Fe College named Krista Hoyt, prying open a sliding glass door with a screwdriver. I hate them sliding glass doors. Finding she was not at home, he waited for her. Actually sat and waited for her to come home. Oh. So he sat in the living room. At 11 a.m, Hoyt entered the apartment and she was obviously surprised by Rowling sitting there. He placed her in a chokehold. After she'd been subdued, he used duct tape to gag her mouth and bound her wrists together behind her back and led her to the bedroom, where he cut the clothes off her body and forced himself on her. As in the Powell murder, he forced her to lie face down on the bed and he stabbed her in the back, this time rupturing her aorta. He then flipped her body over and sliced her abdomen, from pubic bone to her breastbone. After arriving back at his campsite, he was homeless and he lived in the woods in a tent. After arriving back at his campsite, Rowling could not find his wallet and he thought he must have left it at the murder site. So he went back. At which time he decapitated Hoyt. For those who don't know what that means, he cut off her head. He posed her body in a sitting position on the edge of the bed and placed her head on a shelf facing the corpse. He later claimed his intent was to add to the shock to whoever discovered her. Very thoughtful of him. The community, not surprisingly, was in a state of panic. Absolute state of panic. And the case did receive significant media attention. So everybody knew what had happened. Law enforcement agencies launched a massive manhunt to capture the killer. But Rowling's killing spree terrorised the town for several days. Many students had begun to take extra precautions, such as changing their daily routines, which is the norm. If you know something's happening and you change what you're doing. If you normally go for a run at 7 o'clock, don't go. Make it at 9 o'clock. Things like that. And they also started sleeping together in groups. God love them. Because the spree was happening so early in the fall semester, some students actually withdrew their enrolment or transferred to other schools. She was like, he's ruined people's lives that weren't even involved in it. Changed people's lives. Changed their direction that weren't even involved in what he was doing. Tracy Pauls, who was 23 years old, was living with their roommate Manny Taboda, also 23. On Monday, August 27th, Rowling broke into their apartment by prying open the sliding glass doors. See? You should get rid of these sliding glass doors. And he's done it with the same tool he'd used previously, the screwdriver. That's how easy it is. Rowling found Taboda asleep in one of the bedrooms and killed him after a struggle. Hearing the commotion, Pauls went down the hall to Taboda's bedroom and saw Rowling. She attempted to barricade herself in her bedroom, but Rowling broke through the door. He taped her mouth and wrists, cut off her clothing and forced himself on her, before turning her over and stabbing her 3 times in the back. He then posed Paul's body, but left Taboda in the same position that he died. With the exception of Taboda, all of his victims were petite, white brunettes with brown eyes, just like his mother. Although law enforcement initially had very few leads, police did identify 2 suspects. One suspect was Edward Lewis Humphrey, who I just don't understand. I tried looking at the kind of information that they got on this kid and can't find it. They just said he was a suspect, so he was arrested. But look, listen to how he's described. He was a University of Florida student who had a history of mental illness and bore numerous scars on his face from a car accident. And that made him a suspect. Humphrey was arrested after a physical altercation with his grandmother and held in custody for 5 months until a grand jury refused to indict him on the murder charges, citing insufficient evidence. Humphrey's photo was already repeatedly shown to the press and media outlets, so everybody knew. Authorities publicly cleared him of all charges after Rowling's arrest. The other suspect was also later cleared. No information on who that was, though. Louisiana police alerted Florida authorities to an unsolved triple murder in Shreveport on November the 4th, 1989. Detectives noted that there were similarities between the Gainesville murders and those of 55-year-old Tom Grissom, his 24-year-old daughter Julie, and his 8-year-old grandson Sean. The family had been attacked in their home as they were preparing for dinner. Afterwards, Julie Grissom's body had been mutilated, cleaned and posed. Don Maines, an investigator on the case in the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, travelled to Shreveport in November 1990 because of similarities between the murders committed in Gainesville and the murders committed in Shreveport. They included posing of the victims, tape residue on the victims' bodies, and the vinegar used to wash the bodies down. But they also found that the perpetrator of both was type B blood. Don Maines actually called this a revelation in the case when he found out that the Gainesville, the Shreveport murders were also a type B. Shortly after Maine's trip to Shreveport, a Shreveport resident, Cindy Jurasich, called Crime Stoppers and reported that Danny Rowling was possibly connected to the murders in both cities. 3 months earlier, in August 1990, Jurasich heard a news report about a string of murders as she travelled through the Florida Panhandle. The report made her think about Rowling, whom she had met at her Louisiana hometown church, and his possible link to these 3 others in Shreveport was 3 other Shreveport murders. So her mind was working overtime. Rowling had said deeply disturbing things to both her and her then husband Stephen Dobbin. She said he'd come over every night for a while, and then one night Stephen came in and he goes, "He's got to go." Cindy said she also said that Stephen told her that Rowling had told him that he had a problem, and when Stephen asked him what the problem was, Rowling had replied, "I like to stick knives into people." Cindy said she dismissed these comments when she first heard about them because she didn't want to believe that Rowling could be responsible for the murders in Shreveport. Rowling had also told Cindy one day, "I'm going to leave this town and I'm going to go where the girls are beautiful and I can just lay in the sun and watch beautiful women all day." News of the Gainesville murders haunted Cindy, so she finally contacted police in November based on her hunch about Rowling's connection to the murders in both cities. "It wouldn't let me rest," she said. "One day I picked up the phone I called Crime Stoppers and I said, I think there's one guy y'all need to investigate. Danny Rowling. Investigators responded to the tip and quickly found Rowling. They didn't have to look far. He's actually been arrested on September the 7th, 1990, for a supermarket robbery in Florida. The robbery had been committed about 10 days after the bodies of Pauls and Taboda had been found. He was being held in Marion County Jail, 40 miles south of Gainesville. Investigators then determined that Rowling had type B blood, just like the suspect in both the Gainesville and Shreveport murders. Once Florida investigators realised that Rowling had multiple convictions for armed robbery, they realised that he could have actually been one responsible for a bank robbery that occurred the day Krista Hoyt's body was found. He was a busy guy, wasn't he? They returned to the evidence locker, which is where, when they found his campsite, they took all kinds of stuff from there, but it just gone into the evidence locker. So they returned to said locker, where the gun, screwdriver, bag of money and cassette player had been stored, and they actually listened to the tape. They'd had it for ages and hadn't listened to it. So now they listened to it. They also found tools matching marks left on the Gainesville murder scenes. You know, the screwdriver from the sliding doors. The small camp where he'd been living in the wooded area near apartment complexes frequented by students. Investigators discovered audio diaries he had made there, alluding to the crimes. Later, it was discovered that on August the 5th, 1990, Rowling broke into the home of Janet Frake in Sarasota. He had bound and gagged her with duct tape. He'd assaulted her, forced himself on her, but didn't kill her. My God, how lucky was she? I mean, I'm not saying someone's lucky because they were only raped, but he didn't kill her. In November 1991, Rowling was charged with 5 counts of murder. He was brought to trial nearly 4 years after the murders. He claimed his motive was to become a superstar, similar to Ted Bundy. In 1994, before his trial could get underway, Rowling unexpectedly pleaded guilty to all charges. Subsequently, State Attorney Rod Smith presented the penalty phase of the prosecution. During his trial, Court TV conducted an interview with Rowling's mother from her home, during which his father could be heard shouting off camera. You know the one, Father of the Year. On April 20th, 1994, Rowling was sentenced to death. He was diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, no shit, and paraphilia. Paraphilias are persistent and recurrent sexual interests, urges, fantasies and behaviours of marked intensity involving objects, activities or even situations that are not typical in nature. He's the guy. Shortly before he was executed in Florida for the series of killings in Gainesville, Rowling claimed responsibility for the Shreveport murders too, handing his spiritual advisor, Reverend Mike Hudspeth, and Florida police a handwritten confession and apology. Rowling had a last meal of lobster tail and sang a gospel hymn. Now, you all wanted to know that, didn't you? But he made no statement immediately before his execution. His execution was witnessed by many of his victims' relatives. He was executed by lethal injection at Florida State Prison on the 25th of October 2006, after the US Supreme Court actually rejected a last-ditch appeal. He was pronounced dead at 6:13 p.m. The Gainesville murders left a lasting impact on the community, and they're still remembered as one of the most notorious crime sprees in Florida history. He killed so many people in such a short period of time. Thank you so much for allowing me to tell you this story. And thank you so much for listening. It means a lot. If you found it interesting, please hit the like button and consider subscribing. Why not? Got nothing to lose. You don't have to look at me. You stick your earbuds in and go walk around the house doing your cleaning. It's free to do, so don't hold back. And remember this. Smiling in the morning puts a happy face on the day. I've been Sue, TTFN.